Hi everyone, hope you're well. I've just come across a report by NPR, and they have spoken about Jeremy Corbyn and his latest, in my opinion, disgraceful position in world affairs, for want of a better term. So I'm going to read this out, but I just think this reiterates why it is such a good thing this man didn't get anywhere near 10 Downing Street. I think Jeremy Corbyn is dangerous. Um, and I think that it would be easy to ignore him if it wasn't for the fact that he does still command quite a large following amongst the far left, and even some on the centre left. But anyway, here's the report. I think this is a disgrace, but I'm not surprised at all by it. Like I say, it's by NPR. Jeremy Corbyn criticises UK for sending weapons to Ukraine and prolonging Russia's invasion. And the report by Sophie Barnett for NPR. Excuse me, for LBC. I was looking at another link. LBC, that is. Um, the former Labour leader who refused to blame Russia for the Salisbury poisonings in 2018 said that pouring arms isn't going to bring back a solution. Instead, he urged the West to try and secure a peace deal with Vladimir Putin bring the conflict to an end. Speaking in an interview with Al Mayadeen, an independent Arab satellite news channel, the independent MP for Islington North said it was disappointing that hardly any of the world's leaders used the word peace when discussing the invasion. He claimed too many used the language of more war and more bellicose war. Of course, Corbyn's only talking about the West. He's fine with Russia's allies. He said Ukrainians are dying. Ukrainians have gone into exile. Thousands and thousands, and Russian soldiers are dying. Conscripted young Russian soldiers are dying. This war is disastrous for the people of Ukraine, for the people of Russia, and for the safety and security of the whole world. And therefore, there has to be more, much more effort put into peace. And who started the war, Jeremy? The UN cannot help, Mr. Corbyn suggested, then the African Union or Arab League, which includes Syria, that great gatekeeper of human rights, should mediate because they have no direct economic interest one way or the other. Well, that's dubious, given Russia's ties to Syria. His comments are likely to prompt a backlash from Labour MPs, including his successor Keir Starmer and Conservatives. I really hope Labour MPs hammer into him for this. I think it's a disgrace. The UK has sent hundreds of millions of pounds worth of military aid to Ukraine since Russia's barbaric invasion back in February. Volodymyr Zelensky, the country's heroic president, has praised Boris Johnson in the UK for standing by his country and providing support. However, Mr. Corbyn criticised the decision to send weapons, saying pouring arms in isn't going to bring about a solution. It is only going to prolong and exaggerate this war. Mr. Zelensky has made it clear that he will not agree to cede any land to Russia to secure a peace deal. And why the hell should he? Tobias Ellwood, chairman of the Defence Select Committee and a former Defence Minister, told the Telegraph, Corbyn is illustrating yet again why he would have been such an inappropriate Prime Minister for the nation. He doesn't understand that the geopolitical consequences of supporting democracy occasionally means using hard power. This is deeply irresponsible for a senior politician. I hope his comments are not seen to undermine the wider support for and the commitment to supporting Ukraine following this unprovoked invasion by Putin. Mr. Corbyn currently sits in Parliament as an independent MP after having the whip withdrawn by Labour because he said anti Semitism in the party had been overstated for political reasons. He was also kicked out of the party, although he was reinstated by the membership. Well, it's important to look at Corbyn's track record. This is a man who has a long track record of defending foreign tyrants. And one of the most odious things about Jeremy Corbyn is the sheer hypocrisy of the man. I mean, to his supporters, he's this kindly figure who's all about social justice and standing up to capitalism and standing up for workers' rights. And he's a good socialist man, and his heart's in the right place. But I question Jeremy Corbyn's moral compass. This is a man who has consistently defended foreign tyrants. When Fidel Castro died, he was among those leftists who were falling over themselves and gushing praise for the Cuban dictator, despite that regime's brutal human rights record. Um, There is something very, very rotten about the far left worldview. It's always anti West, always. So you can be absolutely sure no matter what the situation, Corbyn and his ilk will find a way to blame the West. Let's be clear about this. Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Putin attacked Ukraine. NATO did not attack Russia. This is the facts. After weeks of saying they wouldn't invade, that's exactly what they done. Putin, his regime, and mouthpieces like RT were proven to have lied. For years, they propped up the murderous regime in Syria. I don't need to give a long litany here of Putin's crimes against humanity because it's very long. Even now, you have nationalistic demagogues on Russian state TV who casually talk about wiping out Western cities with nuclear war. Of course, Corbyn doesn't have a single word to say against them. What I find so odious about his position is he masquerades it as a call for peace. But what does that really mean? Okay, there might be temporary peace. If you give Putin what he wants, there might be a temporary cessation of hostilities. But at what price? Asking the Ukrainians to basically give up their country or to cede large parts of it? I mean, this is outrageous. That would be like if there was an invasion of this country and let's say the whole of East Anglia was, oh, well, let's just give it up. Or let's say Birmingham or a big chunk of Scotland, or let's just throw away Northern Ireland. Let's just give away part of the country to the invaders. It's an outrageous idea. It's totally unreasonable, and it shows Jeremy Corbyn's contempt for Ukraine. For him to pretend that this is about compassion for the Ukrainian people. I mean, think about it. If the Ukrainians just give up, if they just say, well, we're never going to win, let Russia have what it wants, then they become an occupied land. If they just give up their sovereignty, then they're basically at Putin's boot. I think that's an outrageous idea. And what's so grotesque about this is that for all his claims to have stood against fascism and stood against the far right, I mean, what's actually going on here is Russian imperialism. That's the irony of it. That's what's so perverse about leftists defending Putin. And his supporters might say, oh no, he's not defending Putin, he's just calling for peace. But you cannot reason with a tyrant. You cannot have neutral ground. You cannot sit on the fence with someone like Putin. Time and time again, the West has reached out to this man. Time and time again, Putin's had chances. And every time, he has acted with belligerence. Don't forget, for some years, I was going to say many years, but for some time, Russia was a member of the G8. It was brought in. Western leaders, successive presidents and prime ministers and chancellors tried to, welcome Putin as a level player. There was no gloating about the end of the Cold War. The truth of the matter is, millions of Ukrainians are suffering, and millions of young Russian soldiers, for that matter, well, thousands, because of the tyranny of one man and his regime. This all comes down to Putin. And the fact that Jeremy Corbyn cannot see that shows how dangerously unfit for office he would have been. Thank goodness he didn't win. Twice the British people rejected him. And the Corbynites will say, oh, it's the right wing Murdoch media that stopped him from getting in. How do they explain the fact that many centre left people rejected Corbyn? How do they explain the fact that there were millions of people who don't love the Sun or the Daily Mail who were suspicious of Jeremy Corbyn? The fact of the matter is, his worldview is anti West. I think Corbyn's a borderline traitor. I think he would have been a terrible leader. It doesn't matter what compassionate policies he would have had domestically, his worldview is dangerous. It was anti West, it was dangerous. But it isn't just the left that appease Putin, the hard left. You also get Putin appeasers on the right, and they should be shamed and shunned just as much. Viktor Orban in Hungary, Matteo Salvini in Italy, Trump, I would argue, in the US. I mean, Trump apologists and Trump cultists say, oh, but his administration kicked out Russians. But in his entire tenure as president, not once did Trump bring himself to condemn Putin on the day of the invasion, on the very day of the invasion. Trump called it a genius move. I think that's unforgivable. And if you're going to argue, oh, well, it wasn't about praising Putin, it was just a swipe at Biden, what does that say? It says that Trump's ego matters more than national security. It says that Trump's ego counts more to him than doing the right thing and having the right judgment when it comes to international affairs. Um, a lot of criticism can be made of Biden, but I think he was right to arm the Ukrainians. I think we were right to arm the Ukrainians because this is a war of survival. No war is good. No one's saying the war is good, but it is absolutely right that the Ukrainians are supported in defending their country. If this was any other European country, it should be the same thing. This idea that the Ukrainians should just give it up. I do think one risk is, and this is definitely happening in the United States, particularly among Republicans. And I think over there, it's kind of like because Ukraine's more distant, they do see it as this European problem. But in Europe, we absolutely shouldn't be complacent about this. I think the danger is as the war drags on, there is going to be war fatigue. I mean, not to derail here, but I was watching an old video of Edward Heath, and he was talking about the troubles in Northern Ireland in the early 70s, and he was saying if people in England and Scotland are tired of hearing about this, imagine what the people of Northern Ireland are going through, having bomb attacks, every week. So it's something similar, I think, on a much, much bigger scale, of course. Ukrainians have died in their thousands, so have the Russians. This is a major, major war. This isn't a small thing. It's a major war. And I think because it's been such a big story in 2022, probably the biggest story of this year, um, there is a risk that the news cycle, being what it is, people will get tired of hearing about it. Oh, it's Ukraine again. What's new? That would be a big mistake. And in terms of foreign policy, it shouldn't be the policy. I think Truss and Sunak are right to prioritise it. Of course, they should prioritise China as well. Xi Jinping has been making typically thuggish threats with Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan. She's the first senior US official to do this in some time. Saying that America's playing with fire. But the United States hasn't actually said they recognize Taiwan's independence. What they have said is they would defend Taiwan if it was attacked. Um, I think China's watching the situation very closely, but I really, really believe the bear and the dragon both need to be watched like hawks. And it sickens me that someone like Jeremy Corbyn constantly puts blame on the West. He never blames Russia, and the fact he goes to an Arab channel to do this says it all. Because he would not be taken seriously in this country, except by other Putin stooges. But there is a contingent of Corbyn supporters out there, and they continue to give Keir Starmer a headache. I will say this: for all Starmer's faults, I think he's pandered too much to the woke left and identity politics. But I will give Starmer credit. At least his worldview isn't dangerous. At least we don't have to fear a Prime Minister Starmer being a stooge for Russia or China. I don't think that would be the case. A Prime Minister Corbyn, that would very much have been a possibility. And ironically, this is something he shares with the likes of Marine Le Pen and Viktor Orban and Matteo Salvini. Does Corbyn want that sort of company? That's the irony about Putin apologists. They can be found on the hard left and the hard right, albeit for different reasons. I mean, to the hard left, they sort of see NATO as this colonialist power, and Russia simply standing up for itself because it was humiliated after the Cold War. Um, and that's more or less their logic. They hate NATO. The hard right probably hate NATO as well, but their whole thing is, oh, we need to. Putin's the answer against the globalists. Putin in Russian society kind of stands up for conservative values. Um, and whilst the West is busy arguing about gender pronouns, Russia's protecting marriage and stuff like this, they tend to go down that line. Um, but they're just as disgraceful as the far left. And I absolutely don't trust the likes of Donald Trump. And yes, Tulsi Gabbard. I made a video a few years ago. I'm talking about Congresswoman Gabbard. When she made that controversial visit to Syria, and her supporters, didn't like what I had to say because I condemned her decision to do that. Subsequently, she's done nothing to prove otherwise. She has continued to act as an apologist for foreign dictators. She's condemned the Democrats for, as she puts it, their warlike attitude towards Russia. She's failed to condemn Russia at all, at least not in any significant way. I absolutely don't trust Tulsi Gabbard, and I hope she stays well away from the White House, as I hope Corbyn and his kind stay well away from Downing Street. I'm sick of these Putin appeasers, and I'm sick of them presenting it as a pacifist thing. There's nothing pacifistic about appeasing a tyranny, because at some point that tyranny is going to trigger another war anyway. I mean, let's say the Ukrainians just give up their land, right? And Russia's an occupying force. Well, you'll still have a guerrilla campaign against Russian occupiers, even if Zelensky gave up his country, and he's never going to do that. But if he did, then there would be Ukrainian resistance who will say, well, he should never have done that. He should never have given the country up, and they'll fight against Russia. So you cannot have peace. You cannot have peace with a tyrant like Putin. The only way this ends is for a Ukrainian victory. And I know that will be long and probably bloody, but what's the alternative? The alternative is asking the Ukrainians to be slaves of Putin. I mean, let's not forget, captured Ukrainians were sent to basically concentration camps in Russia. These cities and these communes, it's a very sinister, murky thing going on. I think what Russia's doing is evil. Not long ago, the footage emerged that they had a captured POW and they castrated the man. Russian troops castrated this Ukrainian POW. That's the sort of evil thing the Russians are doing, and it's happening every day. So, in those circumstances, asking the Ukrainians to basically surrender the country is is morally despicable. And I hope Ukraine keeps a note of these people, the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and other appeasers, and makes them persona non grata. Of course, I'll say this as a final point. Of course, if we're funding Ukraine, if we're sending weapons to Ukraine, the Ukrainians should also be transparent with us. Um, so we need to know exactly where that's going, and I do think Ukraine should allow access to Western news agencies. They haven't entirely done that across the board. But this idea that it's a 50-50 situation, and those fools and those appeasers who are approaching it like that, really they're deluded. They're dangerously deluded. Um, so shame on Jeremy Corbyn and shame on all the other Putin appeasers. They're no better than those appeasers of the 1930s. They really aren't. Because I really believe that Putin poses the biggest threat to Europe of any tyrant since Hitler. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And potentially he's even worse because of the nuclear factor. Make no mistake, Putin is a very dangerous man, and we can never ever be complacent about the threat he poses to this continent. I mean, Germans are already going into power outages and saving their energy supplies because of the threats that Russia's making about cutting off gas. Um, I just think appeasement, without wanting to repeat myself, appeasement of Moscow or Beijing right now is morally unforgivable. It's very unpractical, it's very foolish, but it's also morally indefensible. And I think any politician who pushes it under the guise of peace really needs to be scrutinized because it's a false message. Oh, but I just want peace. They really, really need to be scrutinised for that, whether it be Jeremy Corbyn or Tulsi Gabbard or any other appeaser. They need to be scrutinised for their false claim that they're just interested in peace. What they're really saying is we need to turn a blind eye to what Russia's doing. It's pathetic, it's cowardly, and I think it's just plain wrong.